He humiliated the defenseless little girl, shaving her head just because she was poor. Cruel laughter echoed around, but the millionaire who witnessed the scene didn't stay silent. With an unexpected gesture, he changed the girl's fate and shocked everyone. If this story interests you, subscribe to our channel to receive all our emotional stories. Continuing. The afternoon sun reflected off the mirrored windows of the corporate building on Madison Avenue, while Richard Morgan adjusted, his Italian silk tie in front of the elevator mirror. At 52, his face marked by lines of expression revealed the weight of decisions he needed to make daily as CEO of one of the country's largest consulting firms. He double-checked the numbers in his mind one more time. The meeting with shareholders wouldn't be easy. The third quarter had closed below expectations, and he needed answers. Leaving the building, Richard decided to do something unusual: walk to the restaurant where he had scheduled his next appointment, instead of calling his driver. Perhaps the city air would clear his thoughts. The streets of downtown Manhattan pulsed with their characteristic energy: hurried executives, street vendors, the constant noise of cars. For Richard, it was just another backdrop that went unnoticed in his meticulously planned routine. That's when a sharp cry cut through the air, coming from a narrow alley between two commercial buildings. Richard hesitated for a moment, but something about that sound made him change his course. What he found would be etched in his memory forever. A small girl, who appeared to be no more than 6 years old, was kneeling on the dirty ground while a disheveled man brutally ran a rusty pair of scissors through her hair. The dark locks fell around her like dead leaves, forming a sad carpet on the stained concrete. The smell of garbage and urine emanating from the alley almost made Richard step back, but it was the girl's eyes that kept him there, an empty gaze, devoid of the vivacity that should exist in a child of that age. "Stop moving!" the man vociferated, pulling hard on a knot in the girl's hair, which elicited another muffled moan from her. Her clothes, dirty and torn, hung on her fragile body like rags. Her brown skin was marked by patches of dirt and what appeared to be days, perhaps weeks, without a proper bath. Richard felt his stomach turn. In his 30 years of career, he had learned to maintain emotional distance from everything and everyone. His life was governed by spreadsheets, reports, and decisions based on cold numbers. Relationships were strategic, friendships were professional connections, and feelings were unnecessary distractions. But something about that scene awakened, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time, a mixture of anger and powerlessness that caught him off guard. The man finished his grotesque work with a final tug, throwing the scissors on the ground with disdain. "Now you'll be less trouble," he muttered, spitting on the ground before walking away, disappearing into the crowd, passing unaware of the scene on the sidewalk. The girl remained motionless like a small broken statue. Her shoulders trembled slightly, but no sound came from her chapped lips. Richard took a step toward her, and that's when it happened. She stumbled and fell forward, her tiny body collapsing on the concrete like a dried leaf. Instinct was faster than reason. Richard found himself running toward the girl, his Italian shoes stepping on the hair strands scattered on the ground. When he gently turned her over, he realized her skin was too hot, fever. Her half-closed eyes barely focused, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. "Can you hear me? What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady while taking off his jacket and wrapping it around the child's trembling body. There was no response. His phone weighed in his pocket. A call to his driver would solve the situation. He would take her to a public hospital, make a generous donation, and continue with his life. That was the logical procedure, what would make sense. But when he tried to reach for the device, the girl's small, dirty hand grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered, before her eyes closed completely. Richard was paralyzed, feeling the almost non-existent weight of the child in his arms and the much heavier weight of the decision he needed to make. His meeting would start in 20 minutes. Millions were at stake. His career, his reputation, everything depended on his presence in that boardroom. And there he was, in the middle of a dirty alley, holding an unconscious street girl. The sound of the city continued around him. Honking, conversations, the constant noise of life following its normal course. But for Richard, at that moment, time had stopped. He looked at the unconscious face of the girl and saw something he had long forgotten. He saw humanity in its rawest and most vulnerable form, and for the first time in decades, Richard Morgan didn't know what to do. The emergency room at New York Memorial Hospital was a stark contrast to the environments Richard frequented, the smell of disinfectant mixed with the characteristic odor of illness and despair. In the crowded waiting room, his Italian suit and polished shoes stood out from the simplicity around him. His cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from shareholders, from his secretary, from the board of directors. The meeting he had missed was already the main topic in the company's corridors. The girl had been receiving care for more than 2 hours, and no one had come to give updates. Richard paced back and forth, compulsively checking his watch. Every minute there was a minute lost from work, from appointments, from his perfectly organized life. But every time he thought about leaving, the image of those empty eyes haunted him. Mr. Morgan, a young doctor with deep circles under her eyes and a serious expression, called him. "Can we talk?" In her small and cluttered office, Dr. Amanda explained the situation. The girl was in a state of severe malnutrition with multiple infections on her scalp due to lice and lack of hygiene. Her blood tests revealed profound anemia and alarming vitamin deficiencies. But what concerned her most were the signs of prolonged neglect. "She doesn't have any documents?" asked the doctor, flipping through a nearly blank chart. "No information about her family?" Richard shook his head. "I found her on the street. I don't know anything about her." The doctor sighed, taking off her glasses and rubbing her tired eyes. "Mr. Morgan, I need to be clear. This child needs intensive care. We can't simply treat her and return her to the street. We need to contact Child Protective Services." The word fell like a stone in Richard's stomach. Child Protective Services meant bureaucracy, investigations, his name involved in a process that could drag on for months. His reputation couldn't be tarnished by a scandal involving a street child. "How long until she's discharged?" he asked, already mentally calculating how he could resolve that situation in the most discreet way possible. "She won't be discharged anytime soon," replied the doctor, her voice carrying a note of disapproval. "And even when she's physically recovered, where would she go?" Richard felt the weight of that question. His business mind, trained to solve complex problems, couldn't find a simple solution for that situation. That's when the nurse entered the room hurriedly. "Doctor, the girl woke up and she's having a crisis." The screams could be heard from the corridor. When they reached the room, they found the small patient huddled in a corner of the bed, her eyes wide with terror, trying to rip out the IV access with trembling hands. 2 nurses were trying to restrain her, but she was struggling with a strength that her fragile body didn't seem capable of having. "No! No! Leave me alone!" she screamed, her voice hoarse and desperate. "He'll come back! He always comes back!" Richard felt something strange in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Seeing that child in panic, terrified by a fear he didn't understand, stirred something deep inside him. Without thinking, he approached the bed. "It's okay," he said, his normally authoritative voice now soft. "No one is going to hurt you here." To everyone's surprise, the girl stopped struggling, her eyes, still wide, fixed on Richard. For a moment, there was silence. Then, unexpectedly, she extended her small, dirty hand toward him. "Do you promise?" she whispered, her voice so low that it could barely be heard. Before Richard could answer, Dr. Amanda touched his shoulder. "Mr. Morgan, may I speak with you for a moment? It's about her tests. We found something concerning." Richard looked at the doctor, then at the girl, who still had her hand extended toward him. At that moment, he realized he was at a crossroads. That would change his life forever. On one side, his organized life, his brilliant career, his impeccable reputation. On the other, a broken child who, for some inexplicable reason, seemed to trust him. The small hand remained extended, waiting for an answer. And for the first time in his life, Richard Morgan didn't have a plan. In the quiet hospital corridor, Dr. Amanda showed Richard a series of exams and x-rays. Each image, each result, told a story that made his stomach turn. Old fractures that had healed poorly, marks from healed burns, signs of trauma that didn't match common childhood accidents. The girl's small body was a map of suffering that went far beyond life on the streets. "These marks aren't recent," explained the doctor, her voice heavy with concern. "Some are months old, others years. Whoever was taking care of her before—" Richard raised his hand, stopping her from continuing. He didn't need to hear the rest. His mind was already processing the implications of those discoveries. In his years as a businessman, he had learned to read between the lines, to see beyond the obvious. And what those tests showed was a story he didn't want to, but needed to understand. Back in the room, he found the girl calmer, although her eyes still maintained that frightened gleam of a cornered animal. She had eaten a little soup and was now playing distractedly with the edge of the hospital sheet, as if that piece of fabric was the most interesting thing in the world. "What's your name?" asked Richard, sitting in the chair beside the bed. His voice came out softer than he intended. The girl continued to focus on the sheet, her small fingers tracing invisible patterns on the white fabric. For a moment, Richard thought she wouldn't answer, as on the other occasions when the question had been asked. "Lily," she whispered finally, so quietly that he almost didn't hear. The name hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. Lily. She wasn't just the girl, the child anymore. She had a name, an identity. As simple as that information was, it changed everything. "Lily," he repeated, testing the name. "It's a beautiful name." She raised her eyes briefly before returning her attention to the sheet. "He didn't like my name," she murmured. "Who didn't like it, Lily?" The reaction was immediate. The small body curled up, her fingers gripped the sheet tightly, and a visible tremor ran through her shoulders. Richard realized too late that he had touched on something deep, a wound that was still bleeding. "I don't want to go back," she said, her voice choked with fear. "Please don't let him find me." Before Richard could respond, a social worker entered the room. She was a middle-aged woman with a severe bun and an expression that mixed efficiency and tiredness. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Sarah Williams from Child Protective Services. We need to talk about the minor's situation." Richard felt Lily squeeze his hand with surprising strength. The fear in her eyes was palpable, real, suffocating. The social worker began to explain the standard procedures, how Lily would be sent to a temporary shelter while they investigated her case, how they would try to locate relatives, how the legal process would follow its course. Each word seemed like a sentence to the girl, who shrank more and more on the hospital bed. Richard could feel the tremor running through her small body, the silent terror emanating from her. "Is there another option?" he interrupted, surprising himself with the question. The social worker adjusted her glasses, studying him with renewed interest. "What kind of option do you have in mind?" Richard opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again. What was he thinking? His life was ruled by numbers, meetings, cold and calculated decisions. There was no room for a traumatized child, for responsibilities that went beyond the corporate world. That's when Lily released his hand. The gesture was so gentle, so resigned, that it hurt more than if she had screamed. She turned to face the wall, curling up in a fetal position, as if she already expected abandonment, as if it was just another day in her life of losses. "Actually," said Richard, his voice taking on the decisive tone he used in important negotiations, "I would like to discuss the possibility of temporary guardianship." The words left his mouth before he could think about the consequences. The social worker raised her eyebrows, surprised. Lily turned slowly, her large eyes fixed on him, as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. "Do you realize the responsibility this implies?" asked Sarah, her professional tone barely masking her skepticism. "It's not like signing a business contract. We're talking about a traumatized child who will need—" The sound of hurried footsteps in the corridor interrupted her. A nurse entered the room, her face pale with concern. "Dr. Amanda is calling," she said, breathless. "It's urgent. There's someone at reception. Says they know the girl." The silence that followed was deafening. Lily grabbed Richard's arm with force, her small nails digging into his skin through the fabric of his shirt. Her entire body was trembling. "He found me," she whispered, the terror in her voice chilling the blood of everyone in the room. The tension in the hospital room was palpable. Richard felt Lily's grip tighten on his arm, while the social worker and the nurse exchanged worried glances. From the corridor, raised voices echoed, getting closer. "Don't let him," begged Lily, her voice almost inaudible. "Please don't let him take me." Richard found himself making an instant decision. Years of experience in crisis situations in the corporate world had taught him to act quickly. "Miss Williams," he said, addressing the social worker, "as a representative of Child Protective Services, you can prevent any unauthorized person from having access to Lily, correct?" Sarah nodded, already pulling out her cell phone. "I'll contact our legal team immediately. Nurse, please call hospital security." The voices in the corridor grew louder. A woman was crying hysterically. A man vociferated, demanding to see his girl. The sound made Lily shrink even more, her wide eyes fixed on the door in terror. "Hide me," she whispered, trying to tuck herself under the blanket. "He's going to hurt me again." The phrase hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. This child wasn't just afraid. She was reliving a terror she knew all too well. Without thinking twice, he positioned himself between the bed and the door, his tall body serving as a protective barrier. Dr. Amanda hurried into the room, closing the door behind her. Her normally calm face was tense. "We have a couple out." "There," she informed in a low voice. "They claim to be the girl's aunt and uncle. They have photos of her on their phone from a few months ago." The tremor in Lily's body visibly increased. Her fingers gripped the sheet so tightly that her knuckles were white. "They lied," she murmured, silent tears streaming down her face. "They're not my aunt and uncle. He bought the photos." Richard felt his blood freeze. The implication of those words was too disturbing to process. The social worker, who had been on the phone, quickly hung up and approached the bed. "Lily," said Sarah, her voice professional but gentle, "can you tell me who these people are?" Before the girl could answer, the door opened violently. A thin woman with smeared makeup and poorly dyed hair burst into the room, followed by a brawny man whom Richard immediately recognized. It was the same one who had cut Lily's hair in the alley. "My niece!" shouted the woman, advancing toward the bed. "We finally found you, darling. We were so worried." The scream that Lily let out was spine-chilling, a primitive sound of pure terror. She threw herself into Richard's arms, trembling violently. "Out!" thundered Richard, his voice taking on a tone that made executives tremble in boardrooms. "Security!" Two hospital security guards appeared immediately, restraining the couple. The woman continued screaming, now alternating between pleas and threats. The man, however, maintained a sinister smile on his face. "You don't know what you're getting into, rich boy," he said, his voice low and threatening. "This girl has an owner." The phrase hung in the air like poison. Dr. Amanda went pale. The social worker was already on the phone again, this time with the police. The security guards dragged the couple out, but their voices still echoed through the corridor. In the silence that followed, Richard realized that Lily had stopped trembling. When he looked down, he saw that she had fainted in his arms, exhausted by fear and adrenaline. "Mr. Morgan," said Sarah, her face grave, "I think we need to talk about that temporary guardianship. The situation is much more serious than we imagined." Richard nodded, still holding the unconscious Lily. The man's words echoed in his mind. This girl has an owner. His instinct told him he was on the verge of discovering something much darker and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Dr. Amanda approached with a syringe. "I'm going to administer a mild sedative. She needs to rest," she explained. "But first we need to transfer her. This hospital is no longer safe." At that moment, looking at Lily's sleeping face, Richard knew his life had changed irrevocably. What had begun as an impulsive act of kindness was turning into something much bigger and potentially much more dangerous. Richard's apartment, on the 20th floor of one of the most luxurious buildings in New York, had never seemed so empty and at the same time so full of meaning. After 3 days of intense bureaucracy, meetings with lawyers, and an endless series of signed documents, he had finally obtained temporary guardianship of Lily. The transfer to a private hospital had been just the first step in a journey he still didn't fully understand. Lily was sleeping in the guest room, which now displayed some hasty changes: a lamp with soft light, sheets with delicate patterns, and a small teddy bear that the social worker had suggested buying. The girl still didn't talk much, but her eyes observed everything with an intensity that sometimes frightened Richard. Sitting in his office, he reviewed the medical reports for the 10th time. Each page revealed a new layer of horror about Lily's past: chronic malnutrition, signs of prolonged confinement, marks of violence. The child psychologist, Dr. Rebecca, had been clear. The trauma was deep and would need a lot of time and patience to be treated. "Sir?" The voice of Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper who had worked for him for 15 years, interrupted his thoughts. "The girl is awake. She's sitting on the bed, but she won't eat anything." Richard sighed, running his hands over his tired face. In the last 72 hours, he had slept only a few hours each night, divided between his business responsibilities and the new reality that presented itself. In the room, he found Lily sitting on the edge of the bed, her small legs swinging without touching the floor. She was wearing a new pajama, hastily bought, which seemed too big for her fragile body. Her hair, still irregular after the brutal cut in the alley, was beginning to show signs of recovery after the treatments at the hospital. "Hi, Lily," he said softly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. "Mrs. Davis made a special soup for you." Lily raised her eyes briefly before fixing them on the floor again. "I'm not hungry," she murmured. "You need to eat to get strong," he insisted, using the tone he reserved for delicate negotiations. "Dr. Amanda said that—" "Why are you doing this?" The question caught him by surprise, not so much because of the words, but because of the way she said them, a mixture of curiosity and mistrust. Richard sat in the armchair near the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Doing what?" "Helping me," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. Nobody ever wanted to help me before." The weight of those words hit Richard like a physical blow. In his professional life, he was used to dealing with numbers, strategies, mergers, and acquisitions. But how to respond to a child who had known only abandonment and cruelty? "Sometimes," he began, choosing his words carefully, "people do things simply because it's the right thing to do." Lily raised her head, her eyes meeting his for the first time that night. "He also said he was doing the right thing," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He said it was for my own good." Before Richard could respond, the intercom rang. Mrs. Davis appeared at the door, her normally calm face showing signs of concern. "Sir, there's a woman downstairs. Says she's from the girl's old neighborhood and has important information." Lily immediately shrank back, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't let her come up," she pleaded. "She lies just like the others." Richard stood up, his mind already processing. The implications. How had someone discovered his address? The building's security measures were rigorous, and he had taken extra precautions since bringing Lily home. "What does this woman look like, Mrs. Davis?" "Young, well-dressed, says she's a teacher and knows the true story of the girl." Lily began to tremble, her hands squeezing the teddy bear tightly. "She's not a teacher," she whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. "She's the one who took the pictures." Richard's blood went cold. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, forming an image he didn't want to see. He picked up his cell phone to alert security, but before he could do so, Mrs. Davis let out a frightened exclamation. "Sir, she's coming up. She went straight past the doorman with some identification. It looks official." The sound of the elevator ascending echoed through the apartment corridor like a countdown to something terrible. Richard acted quickly, his years of experience in managing corporate crises guiding his instincts. "Davis, take Lily to my room. Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me," he ordered, his voice low but firm. "And call the number for Dr. Amanda that's on the refrigerator. Now." Lily grabbed Mrs. Davis's hand, her steps silent on the thick carpet as they disappeared down the hallway. Richard adjusted his tie by reflex and walked to the door, his mind working through multiple possible scenarios. The intercom rang once, more announcing the elevator's arrival on his floor. When he opened the door, he found a woman who looked like she stepped out of an executive fashion catalogue: impeccable suit, perfectly arranged hair, designer shoes. Her smile was professional, but her eyes were cold as ice. "Good evening, Mr. Morgan," she said, her melodious voice carrying a tone of false cordiality. "I'm Victoria Adams, social worker from the Department of Social Services. I've come to talk about the minor under your temporary custody." Richard remained at the entrance, subtly blocking the passage. "May I see your identification, please?" Her smile didn't falter as she presented a badge that at first glance seemed official. Richard examined it carefully, years of experience with corporate documents giving him a trained eye for details. "Interesting," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Does the department usually make home visits at 9 o'clock at night?" "In special cases, yes," she replied, her smile diminishing slightly. "Especially when there are suspicions of irregularities in the guardianship process." Richard felt his cell phone vibrate in his pocket. Probably Mrs. Davis getting in touch with Dr. Amanda. He needed to buy time. "Please come in," he said, guiding her to the living room. "Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you," replied Victoria, sitting gracefully on the Italian leather sofa. "I prefer to get straight to the point. Where is the girl?" The way she pronounced "the girl" made something inside Richard twist. There was no concern in her voice, only a cold and calculated interest. "Sleeping," he replied dryly. "She's been through traumatic moments recently, as you must know." "Ah, yes," she said, opening a folder she was carrying. "About that, I have some documents here that contradict the version you presented to Child Protective Services." Richard maintained his neutral expression, even as she began to take photographs out of the folder. They were images of Lily, younger, with long hair, wearing nice clothes. She seemed happy in the photos, but there was something disturbing about her look, something he only now could recognize. "As you can see," continued Victoria, "the girl had a stable life with her legal guardians, until you interfered." "Legal guardians?" repeated Richard, his voice carrying a touch of irony. "The same ones who left her in that state in the alley?" Victoria's smile disappeared completely. "Mr. Morgan, you're an important man, with a reputation to uphold. Are you sure you want to get involved in the situation?" That's when a noise from the hallway caught the attention of both. Lily was standing at the entrance to the living room, trembling but with her eyes fixed on Victoria. Mrs. Davis was right behind her, her face pale with concern. "I'm sorry, sir," whispered the housekeeper. "She escaped when I went to answer the phone." Victoria stood up, her face lighting up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lily, darling, how good to see you. It's time to go home." Lily's reaction was instantaneous and shocking. Instead of shrinking back in fear, as she had done, before she took a step forward, her small hands closed into fists. "You promised," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "You promised that if I smiled in the photos, they wouldn't hurt me anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard felt his heart stop for a moment, the implication of those words falling on him like a crushing weight. Victoria remained, motionless, her face a mask of calculated surprise. "Lily, darling, you're confused," she said, her voice now harder. "Let's—" The sound of the doorbell interrupted her. Through the half-open door, Richard saw the familiar figure of Dr. Amanda, accompanied by 2 police officers. Victoria's face lost all color. "Good evening," said the doctor, entering the room with authority. "I believe we have a lot to talk about regarding falsified documents and a child exploitation network." The following hours unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Richard's luxurious apartment, normally a sanctuary of order and tranquility, transformed into an investigation scene. Victoria had been taken to give a statement, her face a mask of contained fury when the police officers put on the handcuffs. Lily remained seated on the sofa, hugging her teddy bear, observing everything with tired but attentive eyes. Dr. Amanda was at her side, discreetly checking her vital signs, while a police officer specialized in crimes against children gently tried to obtain more information. Mr. Morgan, the voice of Sarah Williams, the Child Protective Services social worker, who had followed the case from the beginning, pulled him from his thoughts. "Can we talk in private?" In the office, Sarah seemed more worn out than ever. "What we've discovered is just the tip of the iceberg," she said, her voice heavy with grief. Victoria was part of a network that took advantage of children in vulnerable situations. The photos were just one part of the scheme. Richard felt his stomach turn. The implications were too devastating to process. "How did no one notice before?" "They were very careful," answered Sarah, running her hands through her greying hair. "Perfect fake documents, connections in strategic places, an impeccable facade of legitimacy. If Lily hadn't escaped—" A scream from the living room interrupted the conversation. When they arrived there, they found Lily in the midst of a panic attack, her small body trembling violently as she huddled in the corner of the sofa. "She started talking about the photos," explained the police officer, looking embarrassed. "And then—" Richard approached instinctively, kneeling near the sofa without touching Lily. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft. "You're safe here." "They'll come back," whispered Lily, her face hidden between her knees. "They always come back." "Not this time," assured Richard, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "I promise." Lily slowly raised her head, her eyes meeting his. "Why are you different?" The question caught Richard off guard. For a moment, he saw himself reflected in the child's eyes, not as the successful businessman everyone knew, but as someone who for the first time in a long time was doing something truly meaningful. "Maybe," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I needed help just as much as you did." That's when Mrs. Davis hurried into the room, her normally calm face marked with concern. "Sir, there's something you need to see, on television." The evening news was showing images of the building where they were, with a sensationalist headline about the arrest of an alleged social worker. Victoria's face appeared prominently, along with speculations about a child exploitation network involving people of high purchasing power. "This is not good," murmured Dr. Amanda, observing Lily's reaction to the report. "Media exposure can compromise the entire recovery process." As if confirming her fears, Richard's phone began to ring incessantly. Messages were popping up on his cell phone, from the board of directors, from shareholders, from the press office. His name was already being mentioned on social media, with theories and speculations multiplying by the minute. Lily observed everything with an understanding beyond her age. "You're going to have problems because of me," she said, her small voice laden with guilt. Before Richard could respond, his cell phone vibrated with a message that made his blood freeze. It was from an unknown number, but the content was clear. "You have no idea what hornet's nest you've poked, Morgan. Return the girl or your perfect life ends tomorrow." Dr. Amanda, who had read the message over his shoulder, exchanged a significant look with the police officer. "We need to get you both out of here now." Richard looked at Lily, who was still holding her teddy bear as if it were her only anchor to reality. At that moment, all his previous certainties about success, about control, about what really mattered, seemed insignificant. "Where to?" he asked, already knowing that his life had changed irrevocably. "I have a place," replied Sarah, her face determined. "But we need to go before—" The sound of glass breaking in the hallway interrupted. Her Mrs. Davis let out a muffled cry. In the darkness of the night, through the living room window, several camera flashes began to blink from the neighboring building. Sarah's house on the outskirts of New York was modest but welcoming. After a tense exit from the apartment, with Heidi, Lily wrapped in a blanket and protected by a cordon of police officers, they had arrived there well after midnight. The place, according to the social worker, was occasionally used to protect witnesses in delicate cases involving minors. Richard watched the rain through the window of the small living room, his turned-off phone weighing in his pocket like a reminder of the world he had left behind. The news was spreading like wildfire. Sensationalist headlines, malicious speculations, his photo on every news portal alongside titles suggesting his involvement in a scandal. "Your coffee," said Mrs. Davis, who had insisted on accompanying them. The housekeeper seemed out of place in that simple environment, but her presence brought a familiar comfort, that both Richard and Lily needed. "How is she?" he asked, accepting the steaming cup. "Sleeping finely," replied Mrs. Davis, sitting heavily in a wooden chair. Dr. Amanda gave her a mild sedative, but she still murmurs during her sleep, things that break your heart. Richard closed his eyes, remembering Lily's expression when the camera flashes began to burst through the apartment windows. The panic on her face had been replaced by a frightening resignation, as if she already expected that her brief feeling of safety was only temporary. "Mr. Morgan?" Sarah entered the room carrying a thick folder. "We need to talk about what we've discovered." In the hours following Victoria's arrest, a preliminary investigation had revealed disturbing details. The exploitation network was larger and more organized than initially imagined. Children in vulnerable situations were hand-picked, photographed in apparently normal situations, and their images were used to create a facade of legitimacy for false documents. "Lily isn't the only one," explained Sarah, her voice tired. "But she may be the key to dismantling the entire scheme, if we can keep her safe. And psychologically protected," added Dr. Amanda, who had just entered the room. "The trauma she carries goes beyond what we can imagine." A noise from the bedroom interrupted the conversation. Lily was at the door, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Her eyes, normally frightened, now carried a surprising determination. "I want to tell," she said, her small voice but firm, "about the other children." The silence that followed her declaration was heavy. Dr. Amanda made a gesture of protest, concerned about the emotional impact this could have, but Lily continued. "There was Anna, who always cried. Peter, who tried to escape 3 times. Marie, who—" her voice faltered for a moment, "who never came back after the special photos." Richard felt his heart tighten. He slowly approached Lily, kneeling to be at her height. "You don't have to do this now," he said softly. "Yes, I do," she replied, silent tears streaming down her face, "because they're still there and they're scared, just like I was." That's when the house lights flickered and went out. The sound of the rain seemed to increase in the sudden silence. Sarah ran to the window, her face paling in the dark. "There's a car parked at the corner," she whispered, "and it's not the police." Lily grabbed Richard's hand tightly. "They found us," she murmured. But her voice, although frightened, no longer carried the same resignation as before. "But this time I'm not alone, right?" Before Richard could respond, headlights illuminated the room through the windows. The sound of footsteps in the garage made everyone freeze. Mrs. Davis hugged Lily protectively, while Dr. Amanda grabbed her phone to alert the police. "Get closer to the wall," instructed Sarah, her experience in risk situations evident in her controlled voice. "Away from the windows." In the dark, Richard could feel the tremor in Lily's small body, but he also noticed something different. She wasn't shrinking back in fear anymore. She was standing firm, as if she had finally found a reason to fight. The sound of the doorbell cut through the silence like a knife. The silence that followed the doorbell seemed to weigh tons. In the darkness of the room, Richard could hear Lily's accelerated breathing beside him. The rain continued to fall outside, creating unsettling shadows on the walls through the cracks in the curtain. "Through the back door," whispered Sarah, guiding the group with the experience of someone who had been through similar situations. "There's a path that leads to the back of the neighboring house." The doorbell rang again, this time accompanied by firm knocks on the door. "We know you're in there," a male voice came through the wood. "Don't complicate things." Lily grabbed Richard's hand more tightly, but her face showed a surprising determination. "I won't go back," she murmured, so low that only he could hear. Following Sarah, they moved silently through the dark kitchen. Mrs. Davis held the bag with important documents and some basic belongings they had managed to grab before leaving the apartment. Dr. Amanda kept a protective arm around Lily. The sound of glass breaking in the living room made everyone stop. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Quick," whispered Sarah, opening the back door carefully to avoid making noise. The backyard was soaked by the rain, the mud making each step difficult. Lily stumbled, but Richard caught her before she fell, carrying her in his arms. His Italian suit, which just a few days ago was a symbol of his status and power, was now muddy and soaked. They reached a low fence that separated the property from the neighboring house. Sarah already knew the way. It was an escape route planned for emergencies. On the other side, an empty garage offered temporary shelter. That's when a beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the group. "Found them!" shouted a voice coming from the back door of the house. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mrs. Davis, who had always been the embodiment of discretion and caution, surprised everyone. With unexpected agility for her age, she grabbed the hose coiled on the garage wall and turned the faucet on full blast. The jet of water hit the man holding the flashlight, making him stagger backward. The momentary confusion was enough for them to reach the parallel street, where a police car had just parked, responding to the silent call Dr. Amanda had made. But the victory was brief. As they entered the police car, Lily let out a muffled cry. Across the street, a black car parked abruptly. The door opened, and a familiar figure emerged, the man who had cut Lily's hair in the alley. "This won't." "Stand, Morgan," he shouted, his voice cutting through the rain. "You have no idea what you're protecting." Richard felt Lily tremble in his arms, but when he looked at her, he didn't see fear in her eyes. He saw something different, a mixture of sadness and determination. "He's lying," she said, her voice low but clear. "I know where the others are. I know all the places they use." The revelation fell like lightning. Sarah and Dr. Amanda exchanged significant looks. Lily wasn't just a victim. She was a key witness who could expose the entire operation. The police car took off, taking them away from there. Through the rear window, Richard saw more patrol cars arriving, surrounding the man from the black car. But something in his confident smile, even as he was being detained, said that this wasn't over yet. "Where are we going now?" asked Mrs. Davis, trying to dry her wet face with an already soaked handkerchief. "To a safe place," replied Sarah, her face tense in the intermittent light of the sirens. "But first, Lily needs to tell us everything she knows. Every detail could save a life." Lily nodded, leaning against Richard. Her small body still trembled, but there was a new strength in her posture. She was no longer just the frightened girl from the alley. She was someone who had found her voice. "There's a place," she began, her voice almost a whisper. "A place where they take the children before the photos. It's a big house with a blue fence." Her voice faltered when the police officer driving the patrol car made a sharp turn. For a moment, the lights of another car illuminated the interior of the vehicle, and Richard saw something that made his blood freeze, a small red mark spreading on Lily's white blouse. The emergency room of the private hospital was quiet at that hour of the night. Richard observed through the glass of the waiting room while Dr. Amanda examined Lily. The red stain wasn't blood, as they had initially feared, but a severe allergic reaction, the result of stress and exposure to the rain. Even so, each minute that passed seemed like an eternity. Lily's words about the house with the blue fence echoed in his mind, mixing with the threats of the man on the street. The police had managed to arrest 3 suspects, but it was evident that they were just the surface of something much bigger. "Mr. Morgan?" Sarah's voice brought him back to reality. The social worker was holding a tablet, her face marked with concern. "We need to talk about what happened to your company." Richard had almost forgotten about the outside world, about the corporate empire he had built over decades. Almost. The tablet showed alarming headlines. Multinational CEO involved in scandal. Stocks plummet after suspicions of irregularities. Board of directors calls emergency meeting. "The shareholders are in panic," continued Sarah, her voice soft but firm. "Your lawyer has tried to contact you several times. They want an explanation, an official position." Richard ran his hand over his tired face, feeling the unshaven beard scratch his palm. His soaked suit had been replaced by a simple set of hospital clothes, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't care about his appearance. "The only thing that matters now is keeping Lily safe," he replied, surprising himself with the firmness in his own voice. As if she had heard her name, Lily appeared at the door of the consulting room, supported by Dr. Amanda. Her face was pale, but her eyes maintained that newly discovered determination. "We need to go to the Blue House," she said, her voice hoarse but decided. "Before they move everything." Dr. Amanda made a gesture of protest. Lily needs to rest. Her body is reacting to the trauma, to the stress. There's no time, interrupted Lily, with a maturity that didn't match her age. They always change everything when something goes wrong. Anna, Peter, Marie, they might disappear like the others. The silence that followed her words was heavy. Mrs. Davis, who had gone to get tea for everyone, stopped at the door with the tray trembling in her hands. She's right, said Sarah, after a moment of reflection. If this place really exists, we need to act quickly, but we can't simply invade a property without a warrant, without concrete evidence. That's when Richard's cell phone rang, an unknown number. Everyone froze. He put it on speakerphone. Morgan, the voice on the other end, was smooth, educated, completely different from the men who had pursued them. You're an intelligent man. You must understand that you're in a delicate position. Your company, your reputation, everything you've built, but we can resolve this in a civilized manner. Lily grabbed Richard's hand, her small fingers trembling slightly, but her eyes burned with an intensity he had never seen before. What do you want? Asked Richard, keeping his voice firm. Just a meeting. You and I like businessmen. No police, no complications. I have a proposal that might interest everyone. Richard looked at Lily, at Sarah, at Dr. Amanda. Each of them represented a different side of this story. Protection, justice, healing. But it was in Lily's eyes that he found his answer. Where? He asked. The girl knows, replied the voice with a touch of amusement. The house with the blue fence. 1 hour. The call ended, leaving only the sound of the hospital air conditioner humming in the background. It's a trap, said Sarah immediately. We can't. It's our only chance, interrupted Lily, her small voice firm. I know every corner of that house, every hiding place, every exit. Richard knelt in front of her, getting to the level of her eyes. Lily, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. Yes, I do, she replied, silent tears streaming down her face, because I promised Marie that one day I would come back to help, and she never appeared again after that night. Dr. Amanda approached, checking Lily's vital signs once more. If we're going to do this, we need to be very careful. Her body won't handle another shock. That's when Mrs. Davis, who had remained quiet until then, stepped forward. In her hands, besides the tea tray, was something that made everyone's eyes widen. On Mrs. Davis's tray, along with the teacups, was a small silver flash drive. I found this on the day I was cleaning your office, sir, she explained, her voice trembling slightly. It was Mrs. Victoria's. She must have dropped it during the confusion. Sarah connected the device to her tablet with trembling hands. The content made everyone hold their breath. Detailed spreadsheets, documents, photographic records. It was a complete file of the organization's activities. This is more than we needed, whispered Sarah, her eyes running over the information. With this we can... No, interrupted Lily, her voice surprisingly firm. It's not everything. The photos from the secret room are missing. The ones they took when they thought no one was watching. Richard felt his heart tighten. Each new revelation about what Lily had been through was like a stab. But there was no time to let anger or guilt take over. They had less than an hour. I'm going to call the police, said Sarah, already picking up her cell phone. If they notice any suspicious movement, began Lily, but she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implications. That's when Dr. Amanda, who had been unusually quiet, stepped forward. I have an idea, she said, taking off her white coat, but it will require everyone to trust me, completely. The plan was risky, but it had potential. As the doctor explained the details, Richard observed Lily. The girl listened attentively, occasionally adding information about the house, details that only someone who had been there could know. There's a broken window in the basement, she explained, drawing an improvised map on a hospital napkin. They put a board in front of it, but it can be removed. That's how I escaped the last time. Mrs. Davis, who had remained silent, suddenly grabbed her bag. I'll need some materials, she said, a surprising determination in her normally soft voice. In the following 40 minutes, each prepared in their own way. Sarah made strategic calls, activating a network of trusted contacts. Dr. Amanda prepared a small case with essential medical equipment. Mrs. Davis worked on something she kept hidden from everyone. Richard changed from his hospital clothes into a new suit that his driver had brought, a last piece of his old life that would now serve a very different purpose. "It's time," announced Sarah, looking at her watch. In the hospital parking lot. As they got into the cars, Lily gently pulled the sleeve of Richard's suit. "Are you afraid?" she asked, her voice just a whisper. Richard knelt to be at her height. "Yes," he answered honestly. "But you know what? Sometimes we need to face our fear to do the right thing." Lily nodded, a small smile appearing on her tired face. "I'm afraid too," she admitted, "but not like before. Before I was afraid because I was alone. Now—" Her voice faltered when headlights illuminated the parking lot. A black car, identical to the one that had pursued them earlier, entered slowly. "Stick to the plan," whispered Sarah, already moving to her position. "No matter what happens, stick to the plan." The door of the black car opened, and an elegantly dressed man got out. His face was smooth, almost gentle, the kind of person you would never suspect. That's what made him even more dangerous. "Ah, Lily," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "How much trouble you've caused us, dear. But now—" He stopped talking when he noticed something strange. Lily wasn't shrinking back in fear. On the contrary, she was smiling, and it wasn't a child's smile. That's when the parking lot lights went out. The chaos that followed in the dark parking lot lasted only a few minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. When the lights came back on, the scene had completely changed. The elegant man was surrounded by plainclothes police officers, the same ones Sarah had discreetly contacted, and who had been posing as hospital employees during the last hour. Mrs. Davis was standing next to a van from which she was retrieving filming equipment she had. Secretly prepared. Every moment since the man's arrival had been recorded, including his veiled admission about Lily. But the real turning point happened when they arrived at the house with the blue fence. The authorities found exactly what Lily had described, and more. In the back of the property, hidden by well-trimmed bushes and a facade of respectability, there was an improvised studio. The walls were covered with photos of children, all with the same empty look that Lily had when Richard first found her. "There," said Lily, pointing to a door that seemed to be part of the wall. "That's where they kept the real documents." Inside the secret compartment, besides original passports and birth certificates, there was something no one expected to find. Diaries. Dozens of them, written by the children themselves. They were silent testimonies of years of abuse and exploitation, kept for some sick reason as trophies. "Marie wrote in hers every day," murmured Lily, touching a particularly worn notebook. "She said that one day someone would read it and understand." The operation extended throughout the night. More police arrived, then social workers, psychologists. Each new discovery revealed the frightening extent of the scheme. It wasn't just an exploitation network. It was a complex system that took advantage of the invisibility of children whom society had forgotten. Richard observed everything with a mixture of horror and relief. His cell phone wouldn't stop ringing. The news had leaked, and now his participation in the discovery of the scheme was in all the newspapers, but not in the way he had feared. "Businessman risks career to dismantle child exploitation network," said one headline. "CEO abandons corporate empire to save children," announced another. But none of that really mattered. What mattered was happening in an improvised room at the back of the police station, where Lily, with a courage that defied her age, was helping to identify other children in the photos. "This is Anna," she said, pointing to a girl with braids. "And this is Peter." Each name was a life that could be saved, a family that could be reunited. 3 months passed since that night. The case had turned into the biggest scandal of the year, leading to the arrest of dozens of people, including businessmen, politicians, and fake social workers. But for Richard, the real transformation happened in a small and welcoming office, where he and Lily sat 3 times a week with Dr. Rebecca, the therapist who helped them process everything that had happened. "You know what's funny?" said Lily, One day playing with her new teddy bear, this one chosen by herself in a toy store. Before I thought being strong meant not crying, not feeling anything. But now, encouraged Richard, noticing how her hair had grown, how her eyes had regained the sparkle that every child should have. Now I know that being strong is asking for help, she completed, smiling. It's trusting the right people. The living room. Of Richard's new apartment, smaller and cozier than the previous one, was decorated with colourful drawings. On the main wall, lovingly framed, was Lily's first official photo, her adoption certificate. On the coffee table, along with children's books and board games, there was an official envelope. It was the summons for the trial of those responsible for the exploitation network. Lily would be one of the main witnesses, but this time she would not face her past alone. "Are you still afraid?" she asked Richard on the night before the testimony, as he adjusted her favorite blanket. Richard thought for a moment. His world had completely changed in the last few months. He had lost his position as CEO, some friends who he now realized had never been true, part of his fortune. But he had gained something much more valuable. "No," he answered honestly, "not when we're together." Lily smiled, that smile that lit up her whole face and reached her eyes. "Me neither," she said, snuggling into her new bed, in her room decorated, with stars on the ceiling. "Because now I know that nightmares don't last forever, that sometimes angels appear wearing expensive suits and looking grumpy." Richard laughed, feeling his eyes fill with tears, not of sadness, but of deep and true joy. "And sometimes," he completed, "true heroes are only 6 years old and teach us what really matters in life." Outside, the city continued its frenetic pace. But inside that apartment, two souls that destiny had united in the most unlikely manner found something that both thought they had lost forever: a home. Not just a place to live, but a place where love, trust, and courage flourished, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations begin in the most unexpected moments, and that family is not just a matter of blood, but of heart.